Hey there, it's Gabrielle Nicolay from Speech Kids and Raising Orchid Kids, where we teach little kids to talk and help parents understand their kids. And today we are going big. In other words, big kids. And to do that, I've got Jen Kiss here. Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Gabrielle.
Would you tell the good people who you are and what you do, please?
Absolutely. So my name is Jen Kish. I am a certified parent coach. Basically, I help parents with the challenging behaviors of childhood. I work with all parents, so from infancy all the way up through young adulthood. I specialize in helping parents that have children that have any kind of neurodiversity, meaning autism, ADHD, or learning disabilities, children that have any kind of childhood disorder or anxiety and trauma. Personally, I'm a mother of two. My eldest is an autistic child with ADHD and learning disabilities and in anxiety and trauma. And so that is why I specialize in those things, because I get to live the life of a parent that gets to deal with a lot of different types of behaviors than the neurotypical parents get to deal with. And so that's where my passion lies, and that's who I like to help.
I want to point out immediately,
Yeah.
and anytime you've got a conversation between coaches, this is where we're going to go. I want the audience to really, if you want to rewind, go right ahead. Jen said, and I mispronounced your last name. I apologize, Jen Kish.
That's okay. It's Hungarian. And so,
Yeah.
it looks like an S, but it's like you say sugar,
Yeah.
it's just one of those things.
Perfect. Jen said, I get to experience all of the things that come with autism, ADHD, and neurodiversity and trauma. The way we talk to ourselves about what's happening at home and with other people and whatever's happening around us matters. Do you want to speak to that for just a second?
Absolutely. I do remember what it was like when my eldest was very young, and I was just at the point of like, I do not like being a parent. I do not understand why this is so hard because he was my eldest. I had no point of reference. I would talk about things with other parents, and they would just kind of give me that look like, huh, that's weird. And I'd be like, how is nobody else dealing with what I'm dealing with? I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. I don't understand my child. I don't understand why I'm so bad at this. All of those things. And so, I had to dive into things. We tried a lot of the traditional things. We tried therapy for our child and things like that. But because of some of the struggles that he had, it wasn't the best fit for him. He couldn't form that connection because of some of the challenges that he had. And so I learned that I really had to start parenting differently for him if I really wanted to have that change happen, because he wasn't going to be able to do it with an outside source alone. And so I dove into, a lot of research. I dove into a lot of studying. That's when my career kind of started, and I just started learning. And I used my child as an experiment. I'm like, okay, this book says this, let's try that. We're just throwing spaghetti at the wall, and just seeing what sticks and what doesn't. And then over a time, I'm like, okay, you know what? My child is different. And I always knew that, but he was never different enough for someone to just say, yep, he's this. He was this really complex jumble of things. And so it was really hard to pinpoint what it was. And so through that experience, it was learning what my limits were as a parent, what his limits were as the child that he is, and figuring out how can we grow together and how can we really support each other, that we were able to really make progress. And then I was able to find the joy in parenting. And I could say like, okay, I'm not bad at this, and he's not a bad kid either. We were just on two totally different pages, and now we're on the same page, and things are totally different.
And this willingness to get curious about like, okay, what is it that I need, first of all? Because I think as parents, we're not used to asking ourselves that question, number one, right? It's like the last question you're supposed to be asking. And then also, we come to parenting with this like assumption, because it's been happening for millennia, that it's normal and natural and like everybody's supposed to know how to do it. We have this myth that like babies come to us and we know exactly what to do, which is like nothing could be farther from the truth. So that's like all if everything is going well.
Right.
Then now we've got this other thing happening, and sometimes we know. I had a family I just started seeing they got an autism diagnosis yesterday. I have other families who, I've been seeing them for a couple of years and they still don't have a diagnosis, and that it doesn't matter. It's fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there's this thing happening that we kind of sometimes don't want to acknowledge. But if we can get curious about it, now we've got some insight into the person who's sitting across from us. The way the person we agreed to like feed and clothe and care for until they turned 18 or longer, without knowing who they were.
It's going to be longer.
Right. And for orchids, it's going to be longer.
Yep.
Sometimes. And so it is just like that willingness to get curious. Yeah. That it sounds like was helpful for you in your journey, and that's something that you help parents do also.
Yeah. And diagnosing is so tricky. And I always like to stress to my parents, like, you don't need to have a diagnosis to change how you parent, to be different for your child, to get it to be the most efficient parenting, because it doesn't need to feel like a battle. It doesn't need to be so difficult. You just need to learn different tools that aren't necessarily taught or mainstream with the way that maybe we were raised. So I always like to, go back to that, parent the child that you have, not the child that you were, quote. That it's just.
Although,
yeah,
sometimes those things are very related, aren't they?
Yeah.
And we need to go back. There's this term in the ether, I'm sure you've heard it, is it's like this whole reparenting thing.
Right.
That so often what has happened in our childhood is that we didn't get what we needed. And now we think we have to give the same thing that we didn't need to our child, who also doesn't need that.
Right.
And so,
yeah, there's so much stuff going on. And then you bring your baggage from your childhood and your dreams for what you want to be as a parent. There's so many expectations and so many things going on as a parent. No wonder why we're all overwhelmed.
And then throw in some Instagram.
Right.
Okay. So listen, this stuff is challenging. It's ongoing. What we want to talk about today are the older kids. And so you alluded to sort of these parenting strategies that don't tend to work. What is it that does work? How do we get, here's the question that parents are asking, right? Is like, how do I get my kid to behave?
Right. That's what we all want. We just want them to behave. The way that I really like to start out is coming at it from a connection basis, because when you can connect with your child and they really feel connected to you, they will work hard for you. They really do want to do well. They're not trying to have the tantrums and the meltdowns and all the other complications that they have. They don't want to struggle, just like you don't want them to struggle. And when you can start from a connection basis, you can really get them to do a lot of things. And then also understanding, if they are an orchid child, what are their limitations? Do they have those sensory sensitivities? Do they have, a learning disability or an auditory processing delay or something that's going to make things a little bit different for them, so that you're not setting them up for unrealistic expectations? But always starting with that connection.
Yeah. We talk about a just right challenge in our Raising Orchid Kids class. What is the just right challenge? And sometimes it's hard to spot because, and again, not all parents are educators, right? Not all of them have been trained in like pedagogy of how to break tasks down. And so it can seem like taking out the trash is like a basic thing that anybody over the age of 9, I'll cap it at 9. We could ask 6-year-olds to take out the trash, it's fine. But should be able to do. Certainly a tween, a teen should be able to take out the trash. Should be.
That should. Never parent with shoulds.
And yet I completely lost my train of thought about, I don't even know. I lost it. Pick me up, help me.
Yep. So I think what you were talking about was, if we're parenting from that point of shoulds and we're thinking about like, how do we help grow our child, right? Like, we're trying to grow them into independence. We do want them to launch successfully. We do not want this child, although we love them, to be in our household for forever. That is not our goal. And so how do we challenge them and teach them those independent skills while still meeting their needs and
Thank you for
still
bringing me
honoring
back on
who
track.
they are. Right.
So
Yeah.
even this task, thank you, because now I remember where I was
Yes.
going with this. The task of taking out the trash seems like a unitary thing to us. And yet, here are all the things, and this is just one example of all the things that we do in a day. Here are some of the skills that are involved in taking out the trash. Number one, you have to remember to do it. Number two, you have to, do the physical task. You have to replace the bag. You have to not get distracted on your way out the door and forget what you were doing. These are things that are often, and it's often just kind of the remembering to do it part that's the hardest, right? Getting started is often the hardest part, particularly for orchids. If you've got any kind of autistic spectrum disorder or ADHD, that comes with a side order of executive dysfunction, meaning the part of your brain that remembers to do things and doesn't get distracted while doing them is not working so well and needs some work. So like chunking even this simple task of taking out the trash might be necessary. You might have to set an alarm on your kid's phone or have a checklist or do any number of strategies that are going to help it be a better fit of a challenge for them. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So for older kids, we really want to get a lot of times into those visual modes because it's going to just help a lot. So having a chart of reminders in picture form or written out of what they need to do and even what day, if it's a younger child. For teens, we really want to try to foster that independence of how do I prioritize? So you might not necessarily have days on that, but for older kids, you can have, on Monday, you take out the trash. So you have that, and then you have a little box for their check mark, or if you want to get really creative, you can start moving things around, but let's be honest, check marks work great.
I'm going to show you this is my family chore chart from a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
We put us, the parents, on here too, by the way. But yeah, like this is not fancy.
Yeah. So those visual reminders are super important because again, you want to help support them to be successful. And then you can't forget, especially for your orchid kids, you need to really break down the task. To say, take out the trash. They literally have no idea what that means. They might think, hey, I took it out from underneath the sink.
Yes.
Done. I stuck it outside tied up. I took it out, but then I just left an empty trash can. They need a complete explanation. So, step by step, side by side, for at least 3 times. And your orchid, depending on those executive functioning, may need more than that. And I think that that's where a lot of parents kind of get frustrated. They kind of forget. And then they wonder, well, I keep on telling them, why can't they figure out how to do this? Why can't they get it done? It's so simple. But for them, it really isn't. It's a lot of things that they struggle with. And so trying to help them, figure out these are the steps. How can I help you remember the steps? Going into it with eyes wide open that this is probably going to be a longer task than I expect it to be. And then really making sure that you're holding your child accountable. So you're not going in and you're rescuing them. You're not going in and like, okay, well, they got it kind of out of the house and I'm going to go take it the rest of the way out to the garage or wherever. It's letting them know, hey, this is not the completed task, because when you rescue them, you're not teaching that independence. You're not completing that learning period for them. And that's really what's critical as you're getting into those older child and teen ages.
Okay, I want to come back to connection in a second, but the parents listening are going to say, but Jen, it's so aggravating.
Yes.
It's so aggravating to have to supervise this task over and over and over, and can't they? Again, like you get this all the time. So what do you tell parents who say that?
So, it's not forever. Okay, I do live with an autistic ADHD child, and I get it. I mean, the amount of times that I've had to say, put your dishes in the dishwasher, astronomical, because it is just not a task that he can do. But now we're to the point where most of the time he does remember. But for the times that he doesn't, all I have to say is take a look at the dishwasher. And then he's able to kind of kick himself off like, oh, that's my dish. Okay. So I don't have to always be on top of him for forever. Just know that it is more intense for a shorter period of time in the beginning, because they really need that individualized teaching if you want them to actually grow and be successful. And that's really what you want, because I think a lot of parents, they get overwhelmed. And so I would say pick one chore. Don't say, okay, we're going to do 5 chores and we're trying to learn them all at the same time. You're going to just, it's not going to be pretty for anyone. So pick one chore that you want your child to do well. And once they've mastered it, then start adding on another chore. Because again, you have to remember where they are at developmentally for the brain, which is often much less than their chronological age. And so understanding that, hey, I would like my kid, my older child, my teenager, to be really helping out around the house, but to understand that it may take a few months, 6 months, maybe close to a year, to really get them up to speed on how much I want them to help. And again, just to kind of know that that's what the process is. But once they learn that skill, they are usually really good at it.
Yeah. And that's where kind of that the need for sameness, the quest for predictability. It's like every Monday I take out the trash and now I know how to do it. And I'm going to do it pretty religiously now.
Right.
So is there opportunity? I'm going to ask you 2 questions and you pick it. Is there opportunity for connection in the teaching of the tasks? And also, where are other opportunities for connection? How do we balance connection versus demands?
Right. So there is absolutely opportunities for connection. So especially when you're in that teaching phase, but you're doing it side by side. Let me help you. Let me show you. It's just about that time. I know this smells bad. I understand that you have a sensitivity to smell. So, what can we do for that? Or maybe you don't like the texture of it. Let's have you put on rubber gloves. That connection through understanding where they are in their limitations, but then also letting them know they're going to be okay. They can handle this little bit of stress, because again, we want them to know that they can really function to the best of their ability, within their limits, and to kind of keep pressing that window of tolerance so that they are able to do things. Having them say like, you know what, we're going to do chores now. How about you put on some music and we'll do chores together with the music? Or you're going to make your bed and I'll make my bed at the same time. Even if you're not in the same room, you can still have that connection because you're drawing attention to the fact that you're doing something together. Teens, not so much, but older kids will still like to have a little fun. So saying like, hey, I'm going to go see if I can do my bed, if I can make mine faster than yours. Like, let's see who gets out to the living room fastest.
And then know your kid. I'm going to jump in here.
Right.
Have had a number
know
of
your
families,
kid. Yeah.
Right. They come to raising a
meltdown. Don't do that.
Exactly. Some kids love a timer. Some kids hate a timer.
Right.
Kids love a race. Some kids hate a race. Some kids love big praise. Some kids
and some hate it. Yes.
Hate it. Again, so that's about knowing who's in front of you, knowing
absolutely,
what too, right?
And just kind of, you might think your child is this extremely complicated puzzle, and you're just like, I just don't know. I don't understand. And yet, if you think about the little things, you'll start to figure out like, oh, you know what? Yeah, they always kind of do this, or that never ends well. And you just kind of make this kind of list of like, okay, so these are the things that I can do. And maybe I press things more in this area. And these are the things that I can't. And maybe those wait a little while before, we get other things on track before we kind of try to see if we can move the needle with those.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we say a lot in Raising Orchids is like, unpredictable challenges aren't actually that unpredictable.
Right.
You can you usually know, you just wish they weren't there. And that's totally normal.
Right.
Right. Like everybody wants their life to be easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about sort of building connection while we're also teaching. What are some other things, and maybe talk about some not older teens, but teenagers, because they're kind of a different breed. How are we connecting with our older teens and tweens here?
So the best way to kind of approach this is to understand that developmentally, they do need to separate. They do need to show like that they are their own person, they have their own ideas, all these kinds of things, and yet they do still have a very real craving for family and parental interactions, even if they say they don't. They are still developmentally, and their brains and bodies know this. They still crave it, even though they might say, ew, or like, no, I don't want to do that. Like they might project something that's different than what they actually need for their body. So to kind of go in knowing like, you know what, I'm going to throw something out and you're probably not going to get the reaction that you want, the excitement that you want, and to kind of stick with it. So having those conversations, and when you have a conversation, really trying to be intentional about how you have those conversations. So not doing those yes or no questions, because a teen or a pre-tween teen is going to automatically give you a yes or no, or a grunt, or maybe not even answer you at all. But to really find those questions that make them have to give you more than one word answers. So instead of like, was lunch good today? What about lunch did you like?
Okay, I'm going to pause because you didn't even say, how was lunch today? Because the answer to that is fine.
Right.
Always.
Yep.
Right.
I don't know. Fine. Whatever. Yeah. Something.
What was good about lunch today? Yeah. Okay. Keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. And then, so really working on having those not just yes or no questions can help draw them out. Also having conversations about, especially in those teenage years, that are kind of generic, to start to figure out the disposition of your child in that moment. Because as we know, hormones go crazy and brain development is off the chart. And even if you have an orchid, they're still going through a lot of this, even if their kind of brain age is a little bit less mature, things are still cooking. And so, if you're like, keep on like trying to get that connection and you just keep on hitting that brick wall, bring it back and say generically, like, what are the kids in your school, watching right now? Like, what are the it shows? Because when it's not focused on them, it feels a little more safe, and they're able to kind of connect and say like, oh, everybody's into House of Dragon or whatever it is that, is the it show right now. And then as they're kind of opening up, you can say, well, is that, a show that you enjoy? So you can bring it back to them without them really realizing it, by starting more generically with just teenagers in general, kids at their school, their friends, whatever, because sometimes it feels a little safer for them to get into that conversation. And then you try to bring it back to them to get them to talk. And you can really tell with how open they are with answering as to whether or not they're in a talking mood or not talking mood. I will also say that, and this is especially true for our orchids and our autistic children, is that, don't ever think that you need to have this connection moment like face to face. In a car ride,
just going to ask you about that.
Place.
The car is the best.
Yes, for your teens and your preteens, the conversations in the car are gonna like get you through those years, because there is something about not having to face have a conversation where they will open up more. So whether it be you guys are sitting on the couch together looking at a screen and it just happens to be an ad, if people still watch those, I don't know, but just something where you're just side by side, or you're walking next to each other, or you're in the car, and there's not that pressure of someone's looking at me. I may have to, people think that I need to do eye contact, or I might feel a little uncomfortable about this conversation. It just really helps to take down some of the barriers that they sometimes put up.
I want to address this just for a second too, because for teens and tweens, particularly autistic teens and tweens, they've had a lifetime already, 10 years or more. of people telling them that they should look them in the eye.
Yes.
And even if their parents haven't done it, someone in their life has done it.
Mm-hmm.
And from a sensory perspective, we know from autistic people themselves that it is very uncomfortable, sometimes impossible, to think and look at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
to talk and look at the same time. And so, and not to mention, it's very confrontational. And so it is a type of confrontation that neurotypical people experience as slight. Right? We can do this here, and we're not even really facing each other, but we can do it. We can do it in a conversation because we get a little bit of activation from it, and that keeps us engaged in the conversation. For kids on the spectrum, many times, and again, this is coming from autistic adults who are explaining now. There's so many great like Facebook groups and all these things where autistic adults are weighing in on their childhood experiences where it's just too hard.
Right.
It's aversive. So I love what you said about like, the car, a walk, walking the dog, some third area of focus.
Right. Yeah. And then, I think also when we talk with our teens and our older kids, we really need to work to move towards that more supportive parenting and not that assertive parenting where we're, that's for younger kids where we're telling the kids, what they need to do, how they need to do it, all those things. So really understanding that as they're getting older, your parenting needs to change as well. It needs to morph. And that means that you're reflecting back to them more. You're asking questions that help lead them to problem solving. You're no longer taking on that problem solving role. And then you're doing just a lot of validation because a lot of times it's not about finding the problem for why their friend is no longer talking to them or why somebody else sat next to somebody in the lunchroom and all those kinds of things. It's just the experience of hearing it. That's really how they want to connect. And so to understand that if your only job is to just simply sit there and repeat back, wow, that sounds like that was a tough day, and I'm sorry that happened to you. That's okay because that's really what they're looking for. They're not looking for you to problem solve at that stage. That will cause them to get mad most of the time. That will cause them to shut down a lot of the times. That will definitely get eye rolls, even if it's the exact same way that they feel. Because for them, what they're looking for is just that validation and that I've been heard. And to really work on that parenting shift from when they were younger, where you might actually, well, let me call their parent and see what we can do. Because that's not the same thing anymore.
And it's so interesting what happens, right? And I agree with you. There's sort of this progression of, where we get to be kind of the dictator, and then we have to take on more of a consultant role in if all things are going well. And again, this is going to depend on your child's age and stage of development as well, right? In their cognitive capacity.
Absolutely.
But often what's happening in those kinds of interactions is we go 0 to 90 because we've heard that our baby, who's not a baby, but has had a bad day. And we want to fix it for them. Not only do we want to fix it for them, but we want to fix it for ourselves. Right? Because if we fix it for them, then we get to feel like a really good parent.
Right.
And so it sets off this exact opposite, as you said, like it's the exact opposite of what it is that they need. And so just kind of checking ourselves and being like, oh, who's this for? For them? Or is this for me?
It's a really hard thing to do. It's really hard. And, every parent is going to overstep. Every parent is going to give advice that was not solicited. Every parent will get that eye roll. All of those things will happen to you. You just want to have the goals of really trying to take that step back because, if they are an orchid, they're going to have to learn how to navigate in that real world with coworkers who are neurotypical, with maybe partners that are neurotypical, and just really figuring out, how can I be who I am and honor who I am and advocate for who I am, which is a difficult thing for teens to do because they do not want to be different. So they will not ask for the accommodations that are on their 504 plan, which is a whole other thing. And really working toward figuring out, well, what are you going to do? And if you choose to do nothing, how does that make you feel? And what does that do for your mental health? And, it can be a question of, how do you want me to support you? And if they say, help me figure it out, absolutely. Step in, give ideas, walk them through potential solutions, things like that. But the thing is that they need to be the one to then initiate that help. They need to be the one to say, what do I do? Tell me what to do. And then you can kind of help them more. It's at this age, you really have to invite them and they have to invite you. It's a different dynamic.
That's so interesting. Yeah. And it is exactly what you're saying, this process of separation, and yet we're only cutting one string at a time, and there are many, many strings.
Right.
And that's where some parent coaching can be really helpful. So if people want to work with you, how do they get a hold of you?
Well, they can go to my website. It's happyparentingandfamilies.com. They can also go to Facebook. It's at happyparentingandfamilies.com, or on LinkedIn. They can either follow me, Jen Kish, Kiss, like a Hershey's Kiss, or at happyparentingandfamilies.com.
There you go. And we'll have all of that information in the accompanying notes that come with this video. I do want to remind people that we have a new Raising Orchid Kids cohort starting in January, the second week. So if you want a group situation, we've got that for you. Jen, do you work with people individually or in groups, or both?
I work with people individually, just because it seems like they usually need just that individual attention to figure out what is going on.
Fantastic.
It's going to work best.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Yes, thanks for having me so much.